I want to say thank you to everyone for coming on today and to acknowledge that I'm here on the ancestral territory of the Sinixt Chinaha Silk people and home to the Métis. And very thankful for our good relations with Indigenous people throughout BC and across Canada, or across Turtle Island. And that this is the last of a series of 4 workshops with Inga and Brianna. And they are posted and so can be viewed online. And other than that, I think take it away, Inga.
All right. Well, thank you so much. I'm joining you from Whitehorse, Yukon, which is the traditional territory of the Kwanlin First Nation and Taan Quechan Council. Those are actually self-governing nations under the Umbrella Final Agreement framework that was worked out in by 1993 here in the Yukon. I'm still amazed to live in a place where half of all of Canada's self-governing agreements are. We have 11, with 11 of the 14 First Nations here. The other 3 are holding out for political reasons. They want more than the Canadian government is prepared to give. So it'll happen eventually. Um, what we're here to talk about today is social media from a measuring and evaluating impact standpoint. So the last 3 sessions have been focusing very heavily on sort of strategic thinking around what am I doing with social media? How do I select my social media? As you know, I'm not one to say that you must be on any of them. It really is about figuring out your capacity, figuring out where your audiences are, figuring out what you groove on doing, and then making the most of that. Brianna was, talking with you about sort of the content aspects, what to think about in terms of content. We talked a lot about the prevalence of video. That's been emerging more and more, and particularly strongly in the last year. So now we want to just kind of look back and say, okay, so does any of this activity, does any of this work that we're doing mean anything? Does it make a difference to your business? Does it help you achieve your goals? So to do this, I've prepared a few things. Some of this might be really familiar to you, and some of that might be just an interesting approach to try to make sense of what turn out to be incredibly vast data sets, right? One of the most daunting things about both Facebook analytics, as well as for that matter, your web statistics, is that you get thousands of pieces of information thrown at you. So I want to give you a way to make sense of that. Feel free to ask questions throughout. Never be shy to interrupt me. I'm pretty sure, Cheryl, that everybody has their ability to unmute themselves if they wanted to. If you want to do stuff in the chat, we'll watch that. And Cheryl, if you want to interrupt me when something shows up, that would be really, really good. It's always easier to get your questions answered in the moment than to have to wait 10 minutes, because all you end up doing is be distracted for those 10 minutes. So just chime in. If something I'm saying doesn't make sense or you have a different experience, this is a place for that. What I want to start with is, I'm going to just share my screen for a moment here. What I want to start with is a really basic problem that we're having. And that problem is perhaps best summed up as follows. Oh, the other thing is that when I do this, for most of you, this probably puts me into full screen mode for you. What I do now is I put you back into gallery mode on the side so I can still see people here a little bit. Anyways, so here's the problem. I'm sure you all have seen this image. What do you see is the question? Is it a young woman or an old woman? We all get befuddled by this. Most of us are not able to see both completely at the same time. Most of us, in terms of how our vision works and how our brain processes this lovely black and white drawing, is not identical. My brain is different from Joanna's brain, is different from John's brain, is different from Jackie's brain, right? So some of us will always see the young woman, some of us will always see the old woman, and some of us see somewhere in between, and we can oscillate, right? So I'm giving you this visual example because this is a real problem in terms of data analysis. So part of what we need to understand is that we simply see what we see. We also see what we can see. So there's all kinds of scenarios where, depending on your training, depending on how your brain is wired, you become physically incapable of seeing stuff. You may remember that gorilla, stunt a while back, where there was a bunch of people playing basketball and passing a ball, and the instruction is, how many times have you seen the ball be passed? And you completely miss the person in the gorilla thing walking through the picture. Well, that's the thing called focus. So by giving you a particular instruction and focusing attention, all of a sudden you can't see this really glaring thing. But once you know it's there, it's impossible not to see it, right? So when we look at data and we look at analysis, part of what we're learning to do is to sort of get better at seeing more things, but to also see them in a way where we're not just looking for the confirmation of what we think happened. So we need to start to learn to see beyond our expectations. As a researcher, we do a lot of stuff to train ourselves to be able to do that. It's all about reducing blind spots. I know that as a marketing researcher, the only time anybody will ask me about the methodology I used to arrive at a result is when? It's when you didn't expect the result. Right? Other than that, we're perfectly satisfied that this must be true because it matches my experience. It's tricky stuff. Confirmation bias is a real thing. There's a ton of mythologies we hold about our audiences, about the arts, about audience behaviors that are actually not true, but we use them as, but those mythologies are powerful. So whenever we're challenged to see something or we see a data result that doesn't match that dissonance is actually quite hard for us to deal with. And then the other part that I just want to sort of set us up with is this idea of, what you see is all there is. Sometimes there's a little bit more going on. So it's worthwhile to try to figure out how to make sense of this vast amount of data in a way that gives you an answer to the question you have. But we also want to make sure that the question you're asking is actually relevant and meaningful. Part of what this means is celebrating that I get 4,000, views on a thing by themselves, while 4,000 in the Whitehorse would be a big number. We're only 20,000 people on Facebook in this town. It might be premature to celebrate if that didn't result into any kind of further action, into any kind of business result, into, did it really deliver what I wanted to, or was it just a fun thing to do? So there's a lot of nuance that I want to bring to the conversation. Here's a good question for you. Anybody want to tell me? You just unmute yourself if you want to. What are you looking at here? Anybody? Anybody want to venture? Okay, make it even bigger for you. This is equivalent to a complete data point. And when you're shaking your heads, the reason why you're shaking your heads is because it doesn't have enough context, right? So once I give you the context, you realize that it's not somebody just, pushing a random thing or holding something, that it's actually, sort of a full activity that happened. It had its context. It now makes sense. You now feel like you know what's going on. You still won't be able to tell me whether that piece of glass broke or not before it was finished, but you get now an adequate amount of context to actually start to generate some meaning, right? That's what we're after in terms of data analysis. The other thing I want to say, just to ground us a little bit, is, so what's the point of measurement analysis? It's pretty simple stuff. You want to make better decisions. Is the way that you're writing your posts right now actually delivering the better result? Are there some characteristics of posts that you might have written on Facebook that do better than others? And can you figure out why? For instance, so you want to make better decisions. You want to measure change. Are people taking the kind of actions you want them to take? And are they moving into the direction that you desire them to move into? You want to understand the impact of actions and inactions and mitigate risk. So that's less about sort of the social media analysis piece, more about what you might think about in terms of an overall campaign approach. But I just want to ground us, right? So I don't need you to ever look at your data that Facebook generates if you're not going to make any decisions based on it. It's fine not to look if you're not prepared to make decisions. It's fine not to look if you're really not going to measure the change that you're instigating. But if you are interested in that, and you should be interested in that, sort of significantly, then let's look at what that actually entails. So the way I like to approach that has a lot to do with grounding ourselves in the business result you want to achieve. I've just, I kind of modified a few things from a plan I wrote a while back. So these are really specific examples. The business results tend to have to do with revenue and attendance. The marketing strategy might be around increasing frequency of attendance by certain folks, or attracting new people and increasing their frequency over time. You might have specific goals in terms of capacity utilization, how many, what the number of seats you have and how many of them do you sell on average. There might be some very specific revenue goals against that. In terms of attracting, sort of generating commitment, you might have a membership or a subscription program. So again, you can set very specific targets for that. And when you do that, you start to be accountable for whether you achieve them or not. And everything you do in your marketing and programming starts to, revolve around these things, right? That's useful. How you're measuring those business results? Well, obviously you're tracking sales, you're tracking attendance, you're tracking ticket buys, you're tracking membership, and you'll do that year over year. It's very standard. You do this all the time, in part because your funders usually want that kind of information. The interim marketing measures are a little bit trickier. So one of the classics I still see some of my clients do is they say, well, I want to have the sales goal, revenue increase over 3 years by X%. And I'm going to do a bunch of social media and I'm going to measure that. So, and other, online activities and email, and other, offline marketing perhaps. And I'm going to measure that marketing by looking at my revenue. Does anybody see a problem with that? Perhaps. So the problem with that is that, Facebook doesn't sell, right? Like that's not actually its purpose. Facebook doesn't increase your revenue. Your web presence doesn't actually do that. There is no direct relationship often. What you're instead doing is you're building a campaign with a whole bunch of touch points, and you want to make sure that those touch points convert to those higher levels of your business goals. But the direct measure to go from I ran some stuff on Facebook and I now have sales can have some unintended sort of consequences, where you might feel that your campaign wasn't good enough on Facebook, even though it might have actually delivered really awesome things, just because you're not seeing the sales. Part of the reason why I harp at this a little bit is because when you're talking about social media in particular, they're primarily social. And yes, Facebook has done a bunch of things in the last few years to try to, create a business scenario around that social interaction. But at heart, they're still social. So it's tricky to have a conversion to sale, to ticket sale in particular, as your primary standard against an intrinsically social interaction. What I would favor is that you actually think about how those social interactions are translating into the kind of trust and relationship that then can eventually engender sales. But you probably need some other tools to close some of those sales. Like it can't all happen just using social media. That's why you end up doing email marketing. That's why you're doing some things, that are not in fact online as well to foster that. So I'm hoping that this train of thought, if any part of this train of thought is not quite making sense to you, chime in and we can unpack it a little bit more. And if we're good, I'll proceed. When I think about online measurement, there's sort of three main buckets. One is your web traffic and what websites term conversion. Another one is social media engagement. That's what I'm typically most interested in. And then in terms of email, it would be open rates and click-through rates, CTRs, click-through rates. So there are three quite different measures. In each of these cases, you get a ton of data from Google Analytics, if that's what you're using, from the social media metrics out of something like a Facebook. You get less in other engines, and you get none worth speaking of at this point out of TikTok if you're using TikTok. They don't have the business application quite yet, right? And if you're using an email program, as you should, you'll get tons of data back there as well. So the challenge really is figuring out how to make sense of that data. So the reason why I like to start with the business goal is because what you're really doing is you're creating a system where you're cascading up to that, right? But you can't only use it, is what I'm proposing. So by the time that we're getting into this more nitty-gritty online measurement here, where you get this overwhelming amount of information, what we now need to do is we need to simply say, so what were your goals? What were your marketing goals? And can we design your measurement according to those marketing goals? So a marketing goal might be increase Facebook followers and page likes on average by 15%, let's say, each of the next 3 years. So we go from 1,000 people to 1,150 people to whatever the next piece is, to 1,350 and so on, right? That would be a very specific goal. I can see very clearly whether I'm achieving that or not, right? You basically look at a single dimension on Facebook to figure that out. You also might have a goal around increasing Facebook interactions. It's about engagement, right? Like, it's not advertising, it's not broadcast media. It's not just about, you saw it. It's about what you did with it. Did you share it? Did you comment on it? And you may have some really specific goals around that. So I prefer whenever we have numeric goals with things like that, because it allows you to measure the distance you travel. And if you find that in a single year, you're, increasing these interactions by a much higher percentage, you now adjust your goals for the next couple of years, right? Not putting numbers in, even though those numbers are straight up guesses, right? You have no idea what's going to happen. But it allows you to at least have a target. It's easier to shoot at a target than to simply shoot at an ephemeral, I want to increase Facebook interactions, right? The other piece that you might be trying out, depending on your technology setup, this is either impossible or quite achievable, which is to look at your social media traffic and how that converts to paying customers. So most often you don't use Facebook to sell. It doesn't happen there. It happens in a ticketing system, or it happens at the box office, and it's a general admission kind of ticket. Or it happens out of your back pocket when you go to the grocery store and you sell stuff when you see your friends. If you can tie together, though, your social media, how it drives your web traffic, and how that web traffic translates into the ticketing engine, you can get a fairly complete picture. And what you'll discover quickly is that you get a lot of tire kickers. You get a lot of tickets, people who are kind of clicked, but they didn't act. And in those places, there's a lot of work that happens. It's a little bit off topic, but there's a lot of work that happens in the other parts of your ecosystem to figure out how to, get that conversion to happen. What's your landing page like for that particular Facebook post? Did you use the home page? Even though that was the wrong page, you should have gone to the event page and things like that. All kinds of inadvertent things can happen. Being able to tie this all together, like I say, depending on your setup, nearly impossible or quite doable. It's worth thinking about, because the more you can connect those steps along the way, the more you know that your efforts that you're making using social media are actually having a payoff, as opposed to it's just a fun thing to do for my audiences, but I'm really not able to quantify that effort I'm making is translating into activity that is benefiting your business. So far, so good. I think there's a couple of things running past in the chat here. Instead of funnel. Yeah, Mandy, I think that's exactly what that is, right? You know how the input has to be really, really big to generate leads, and then you qualify them and either really wanting to come to a music show or a dance show, and then by the time I get down to it's Friday night for $25, right? You absolutely get a really, really big sales funnel that narrows down very quickly to 50 or 100 people coming to a show, depending on what it is and where you are. It's useful to think about it in those ways. And in each step of that sales funnel, you know, in a full-on campaign, you would have specific, very few but very specific goals along the way, right? And you'd figure out eventually how big that the upper end needs to be in terms of awareness in order to actually generate the sales you need. So when you're going to the source of traffic questionnaire, so when you're going into your Google Analytics, it always there's a spot where you can go and it shows you what the source of the traffic was. Was it organic? Did somebody go directly to the homepage? Did it come from social media? Which social media? What's the referring page? So this sometimes that's what you need to do to figure out whether, you know, that Facebook click on a link came to your website. So you want to say, well, Facebook tells me that 200 people clicked, but all I can see is attributed to traffic from Facebook in that same period is 100 of them. So what happened to the other 100? It's always a good question. But also, you know, it allows you to sort of create that more linear notion of, you know, I was in one kind of medium, I drove to this medium, I tried to convert it to a sale. How is that funnel working out? And looking at sources of traffic is a fairly good way to do that. What happens here is you're not able to track the individual so much, right? It becomes sort of statistical information. Justine is saying, for the longest time, I had no idea why I was posting to social media, just to do it rather than thinking in terms of call to actions. You wanted more followers, but why? Yeah. One of the issues now with Facebook, I'm sure Brianna touched on that as well, is that the organic traffic that you're able to generate of a Facebook page, this might be down to 5% of your followers. So it matters if you have 1,000 followers or 10,000 followers, because 5% of that is a vastly different experience, right? But that's, Facebook is interested in making money, right? So they all push that organic traffic quite a bit lower. So it really has shifted the importance, right? You end up using it much more as an ad engine than we're able to use as an organic traffic conversational piece in the business use sometimes. But I have some good examples where you can really see how conversation actually does matter. I'm not sure how much time you ever spend on the back end on Facebook, on the insights part of your business page on Facebook. If you're using it, you should probably spend a lot of time there. So I'm just going to share this. This is a restaurant page that I've been managing over the last few years. So I happen to have access to the back end here. And I'm just going to try to make this a little bit bigger for us. So you see here the insights part. It's humongous, right? Each of these items here has a bunch of stuff under it. All of it is data. All of it is overwhelming. So what I tend to focus on is I just look for the pieces that are truly salient to decisions I'm going to make about my campaign. So even in this overview here that they show us, I find that there's far too much information. And a lot of that isn't making me particularly happy. I'm just going to try to sorry, I'm missing part of the, let me just see if this will yeah, something like that. Even on this overview, I find that there is far too much information that's not interesting to me. So what am I really interested in? Depending on the campaign, I'm interested in either awareness or engagement, right? It's as simple as that. When you scroll through here, though, there's a few interesting bits that I think are worth pointing out for us. One of them is this ability to see your competitors or to see other pages in your area. So you see, and you only really get this on the overview on the page insights. You see how I can select a bunch of pages, I can add pages, and I can see what my competitors have been doing and what kind of engagement they're getting. We used to be a lot more highly ranked. The restaurant was closed for quite a while the others were doing takeout. But what you're seeing here basically is an ability to benchmark myself against other things I care about. Right? That's kind of fun to do. Am I really out to beat the competition? Not so much. I just want to play and I want to see, you know, how big a gap do I have in terms of where I'm at and where they're at, because it gives me some appreciation for how I might set goals. And I understand that they're in a slightly different business. Yes, they're serving food, but not the same food, not right. There's a bunch of variables here. If you're a niche thing, you care about other things. If you primarily present dance, you're not going to expect music results, right? There's all kinds of, you know, variables that come into your business here as well. But I do like that ability to kind of have a really quick glance. If you haven't used it, you should. And it's not necessarily benchmarking just against other performing arts in your community, because you may be the only game in town. It can be about saying, what's the local newspaper able to get? What's the local hardware store doing? There might be other entities that are actually doing really well in fostering relationships here. And this helps you simply appreciate that and to figure out, you know, where you might be playing. It also can be interesting if you have a bigger tourism play in normal years, a bigger tourism play, that might be something that you'd be looking at as other organizations in your area that have that too. Now, what I care about typically is about the posts. So here you see this little data field. It only gives me the top 5. But when I click on that, I get a tremendous amount of information. And now I have some functionality attached to it. Let me just see if I can make this a little bit more intelligible. So you see here, there is a couple of drop downs. And one of them is about reactions, comments, and shares. And when you click on that, you get a few other options. One of them is a thing called engagement rate. And you see percentages show up. This is far easier to eyeball whether something is doing well or not, or how well something is doing, right? Than to try to look at the straight numbers. Because then you have to do math in your head to really figure out whether something is doing better or worse. I'm just going to try to switch to this other view that I think I had open. Here we go. I'm just going to show this slightly bigger version to you here. So this is the same page. I just have loaded more things on it. And so when you do the engagement rate, you know, you see really quickly anything over 10% starts to be good. 16%, great. 17%, I'm pretty happy. Every so often I can get, you know, 20 or 25%. I'm super happy with that kind of engagement, like engagement, right? Somebody did something relative to that. This is a lot harder to simply see on the straight numbers. Even when they get high, sometimes when we've boosted things, like you'll see here a post that it was also had some paid traffic against it, not just organic. Of course, the numbers are going to be a bit higher. I now worry about, you know, is that efficient? Is the money I spent a reasonable amount of money for what I got out of that? This was probably this is a Mother's Day ad, an organic post that was boosted for Mother's Day. So I know that there's going to be a lot more engagement on that. I also know how many people showed up in the restaurant, right, for a special event like that. So being able to, like I say, to tie that together is interesting to me. In this case, I also know that the only advertising that would have happened was on Facebook. So I can tie that very linear. I can credit that very linear. We didn't run radio ads or anything like that in addition. So the posts, this stuff is really interesting to me. Okay, the other thing that if you haven't looked at it on this item here, it gives you the reach of fans and non-fans. So fans are the people that follow you. Non-fans are the people that don't. And I'm going to just go to some, you know, higher traffic stuff. So you see this. You see how many non-fans you can reach without boosting? Right, this was not a boosted post. I can tell because that's still available as a it's not grayed out. So I can reach a heck of a lot more people than I would imagine with my organic traffic. So if you don't look at that, if you just use whatever the default settings are up here, you end up with maybe this, right? And it doesn't give you that same sense. It's just organic, non-organic, so paid, unpaid. But I think the fan piece versus non-fan piece might be really interesting to lots of you, because part of what you're looking at is to generate new audiences, to re-engage audiences, yes, absolutely, but also to generate new audiences and new kinds of interest. So I wanted to sort of just, point that out to you as places that you really should pay attention to. Now, right now, all I'm doing is I'm not doing any stats, right? I'm not doing analysis other than eyeballing. You can get a lot of information out of that. Don't underestimate your ability to do that. But what you need to learn is to be critical, right? So am I going to be happy if I'm pulling 9% engagement rates? Am I looking for double digits? Recently, somebody else took over marketing for this entity, and their percentages are, groping pretty low usually. The restaurant got sold. That's why that's happening. I'm going to show you in a moment a data set that shows you kind of a different reality, and I'll talk a little bit about what's actually made the difference in those different results, right? Because that's the stuff that we should be learning.
Inga, how long after you post something should you look at the stats, and like how much time should you leave before you start looking at those things?
That's a great question. So try not to look right away. Good luck. I always look right away. There's a couple of reasons why I do that. One is there is this concept of recency that Brianna would have talked a little bit about as well, that it really matters, or maybe I did 3 weeks ago. It really matters how quickly you get responses back, how quickly you get likes, whether the algorithm will favor that post, right? So it's actually not unhelpful to look within the hour or two, because if you don't start to get traction right away, chances are you either have to boost the thing to get traction, or you might want to make a change in that. Like maybe there is something about the image that you posted that's not quite resonating. Maybe it's too complex. Maybe in my preview window, that image becomes unintelligible and uninteresting, right? So it's actually not unhelpful to look right away. Other than that, when I boost stuff for something like a restaurant where there's daily specials and there's lots of, different kinds of things that go on, I might have a boosted post up for 3 or 4 days. If you're promoting an event, you might have that same boosted post up for 2 or 3 weeks. So part of what you need to start thinking about is how many times does somebody want to see the same boosted post, right? By the time I've seen it for the 12th time, you know what you react like, right? Are you getting bored yet and annoyed? Yeah. So you might actually create a story instead and start to look at maybe a sweet spot for you might be that by the time that I've seen that post 6 times as an audience member, I need to see something new, right? Because you all have an experience of this as a user of Facebook. At what point you kind of go like, I've seen it already. And you get a little bit tired of it, right? As opposed to, oh, that's the next part of the story. And now they're giving me something else. I'm not even talking about making offers or discounts or 2-for-1. It's not that I'm talking about. It's just the development of the story for whatever the activity is that you're promoting. The other thing that's worth looking at is I have a bad habit. I'm a night owl. So I will often post in the middle of the night because that's when I'm awake and that's when I have time. The problem with that is that I don't use the algorithm in my favor, right? So you're better off scheduling some of that stuff. And the way that you can help inform this is, on that post, when you're in your insights, on the insights about posts, this is the area that we're in, you get this. You get the day of the week stuff and you get time of day information. So just because I'm awake at 3 in the morning, which I often am, my audience isn't. A few people are. It's actually remarkable how many people still are awake, but it's not the dominant thing. And this particular page we're looking at is very local, right? Like a restaurant is very much like a local arts performing organization. It's very, very local. So this is not a bunch of people in Australia being awake in the middle of their day. But what this allows me to see is also that during the day between 9 and 9, I actually get a pretty decent, very consistent number throughout. In this case, you may see much bigger spikes in your data. This is worth looking at. Because it should help you generate the kind of immediate traffic you need to beat the algorithm a little bit if you pay attention to that. What you see here is we get small variances by Sundays, and some of the Thursdays, Wednesdays and Thursdays, people are traditionally looking to the weekend and what they're doing on the weekend. Right, like it's not always as real time. I'm going to now go out and get a meal. I'm going to now go out buy a ticket. I'm actually planning. So the midweek stuff doesn't have highest attendance in a restaurant, but it is part of the planning cycle. So that's some of the stuff, right, that you need to sort of appreciate when you're starting to make sense of this, because it informs when you're posting, it informs how you're posting, and making sure that there's a little thing called post types. You see how posts with photos will outdo a post without photo any day, right? It's just this link there. What you would see today, so I haven't done much on this particular page in the last year because it was closed. In the last year, video has become really dominant. We talked about that. So what you would see is a video, a photo, and a link, and nothing, just a text thing. And you would see really vastly different performance metrics, both in terms of the average reach. So photos really enhance reach, as do videos, but also in terms of engagement, right? The two engagement bars about, post clicks and reactions of any sort, so comments or shares and stuff like that. So this is actually important to look at, right? Because this is where you can see, and like I say, what's missing here is the video part. But if you had that, you would see, if you do half decent video, that the video will take over from the images really quite quickly. And this is how you use, this is what you use as motivation to start to get good at some of those other technologies. It's not about creating a polished TV ad. It's about the story value and the engagement value that you're after.
Inga, Justine has a question in the chat about
Okay.
how you set up the story sequence.
Couple of points to that. So this is a slightly different, this is a tangent because it's about content more than about analyzing results. But what you would do is you would basically use a scheduler, right? So whether you're doing, I think within Facebook, there's a native tool now that you can use that is native to Facebook, where you can schedule posts to come out in a particular sequence a few days apart, or if you're using a social media management tool like a Hootsuite or Later or any of those things, you can schedule them in that. So what that means is you can set up your 2 or 3 week campaign once. It's automatically posting when you told it to post, so 9:15 a.m. on a Tuesday versus 10:45 on a Thursday. And then sort of the content gets pushed out automatically for you, and obviously you can pre-plan all of that fairly easily. If you have a particular show that you're marketing or a subscription series that you're marketing, it's not that hard to sort of build a storyline around that, whether that's the awards that a band won, or whether that's a quirky video that they did and posted on YouTube that you can repurpose in your own thing. Like there's all kinds of things you can do to support a story and getting to know something enough to become interested enough to actually purchase. Right, that's your typical purchase decision process, to move from unaware to aware, to being in that phase of, I'm interested in this thing if it only was at the right time and I was available and I got a babysitter. Right, things like that all come into play. Justine, go ahead.
Thanks. The additional part of that question, though, was you brought it up that when you boosted a post, seeing it after 6 times, maybe it's overkill. So are you saying that because I haven't used, intelligently used the Facebook posting boost thing. Are you saying that you pay for a boost of just whatever content you've put up, or is it that you're boosting specific content? Like, I'm wondering how you avoid the 12 over saturation.
So every time you boost something, it's a specific post, or you made a specific ad. Either are perfectly appropriate things to do. So it's always super specific, right? And then you get measures back in return. So part of those measures, I'm just going to see if I can show this to you. I'm just looking for the thing in the ad engine here to see if I can easily find that. Maybe I'll show it to you over here. Just a second. Okay, I'm just going to show it to you here. So one of the metrics that you get back is about the frequency that on the average frequency that a ad was shown. So this column right here, oops, sorry, I'm in the wrong spot on my screen. You're still seeing the same thing, but it disappeared for me. Here we are. So you see, this is a really big spreadsheet, right? One of the columns is called frequency, right here. So what this means is that on this particular, I'll just pick one that's not so daunting. On this particular post, on average, a user saw it 1.3 times. So some people saw it twice, some people saw it once. That's not high. That's not going to be onerous. When we start getting into the 6 or 7s, that's when I want to switch it out, right? So there is natural traffic for a post. Then there's paid traffic if you're boosting that same post. And then, you know, in each engine, you only get one slice of it. So when you're looking at the posts in the view that we just saw on Facebook, you have an ability to see both together, but you don't pay for one side of it, right? You only pay for the paid stuff. I know that's an obvious thing to say. So here, this is where I would say, you know, pay attention. Because one of the things you want to avoid is fatigue. And part of what will happen is you get this sort of diminishing curve where you get less and less engagement against impressions. Right, there's a correlation between the numbers of impressions shown and the frequency goes up, and the same people are seeing it. Like I'm less prone by the time I'd see it the 5th time. If I didn't do anything in the first time around, I'm not going to do anything the 6th time I see it in a social medium, right? It doesn't work exactly like a print ad would, where, you know, the repetition is works a little bit differently. Like when I'm looking at a newspaper, right? So does that? I'm not sure if I'm actually answering your question in a meaningful way to you.
Yes, but now I'm curious about your spreadsheet.
Yes, well, let's dive into that. So here's what I want to, you know, I got this prepared a little bit because when you look at the ad engine in Facebook, right? Like this is about I have an ad. Every post is an ad, becomes an ad as soon as I boost it. And I download a report. This is the data that I get on the back end. And one of the things it does is, so here's my reach, here's my frequency. You see this incredible long number after the period? I get 12.294004 impressions. This is completely meaningless, right? What's meaningful is the 12th part. You'll also notice that when I go down the spreadsheet a little bit, is here it says amount spent. Here it says impressions, and you see how the numbers are displayed. Here's my cost per 1,000. The way that these numbers are displayed, they're completely hard, like they're hard for my brain. They make my head hurt. So the first thing I do is I format this stuff, right? So a dollar amount, so I start adding the commas, right? And it's like super, so this is why I do this in Excel, right? You add the commas, you're able to now eyeball stuff. I reduce my frequency. In fact, even 3 digits are probably like the 2 after the decimal. It's like, how meaningful is that, right? So maybe I just want 1. On the dollar amount, I'm going to keep my cents because that's often all that really matters. On the amount spent, I add the dollars. So just doing this makes this a heck of a lot more intelligible than the raw data view, which looks like this. This is the exact same data set. So formatting is the first step. And then what I do is I say, okay, what was my goal of running this stuff? So my goal might have been to raise awareness. What are the measures that relate to awareness in this data? And can I just look at that, right? Because one of the problems we're having with these data sets that we're given is that they're far too big, and it's like the kitchen sink gets thrown at you. So if I want to simply look at awareness, I'm just going to click through this, what I did here. I basically say, okay, all I need is to look at reach. I want to look at the amount spent, because it's about money that's going out. You want to understand whether the spending that you're doing is efficient or whether you're getting good bang for your buck, basically. You might consider the impressions served important. So the difference between reach and impressions is what? Reach refers to an individual that actually has been reached. So Justine saw a thing, while impression is all the times that it showed up anywhere in somebody's newsfeed. And when you divide one by the other, you get frequency, right? You see how that works. So what I'm going to be interested in from a marketing standpoint is not impressions so much, even though you will notice that what Facebook gives you is the cost per 1,000 impressions. Why would Facebook give you a cost per impression as opposed to a cost per individual reached? Because the dollar amounts become smaller. Not because it's more useful. What it actually doesn't give you, and what I calculate, is the cost per 1,000 individuals reached. So I want to look at, because I'm trying to figure out what awareness have I raised, right? So awareness happens in a human's brain. It doesn't happen by a multiplier of frequency so much. So I need to understand what my cost per 1,000 people is, not my cost per 1,000 times something gets served up online. Is the difference making some sense here? So then I calculate what I care about, which is this. And it's a very simple calculation. You see the formula up here. So all I'm doing is I'm taking the amount spent on the ad, and I divide it by the reach. And then if I want to make that an intelligible dollar amount, I have to also divide it by 1,000, so per 1,000 people, to come up with a dollar amount that makes some sense. This is a sensible metric to me, right? Because this gives me not only my idea of, oh, I reached 1,000 people with each of these individual things, and I can roll that up, and I can say, and Facebook will tell me that over the course of a month, I reached 6,000 people in a market of 20,000. That's pretty damn good, which is what Whitehorse says. Some of you will have much smaller markets. Some of you have much bigger markets. But now I'm able to sort of evaluate whether which posts are doing better and which posts are doing worse at raising awareness. So basically, the less money I have to spend, the happier I get, right? And what you will find is that if you have a very small audience for a thing, they can be more efficient, cheaper, because they're more dedicated people that have seen stuff. And the more you're going to the outer edges of, I want to attract people who aren't as committed to me, I want to raise awareness amongst a group of people that may not know me as well, you end up spending more money. It's basically natural, right? And you spend up more money because to get them to be aware is harder. So just because something is more expensive doesn't make it bad per se. This is back to, you got to understand what you were trying to do, right?
Inga, can you show people where they download this information on the page that you were on before?
I can.
Thank you.
I'm just going to go to the infamous ad engine for a moment. Let me just set it up so we can see the things we care to see. All right, just a sec. I am almost there. right. So I'm just trying to make it fit my screen so I can actually show it to you most easily. All right, there we are. All right. So when you're going to the ad engine, the way you get there, I'm going to show you the whole quick process. So we're on the restaurant page. We were in Insights before. You're seeing that page, right? Okay, we were in Insights before. Now you simply go straight to the Ad Center, and you get something like this, perhaps. But from here, you also can go into a thing called the Ad Manager, and you get this. So here again, you see every post. These are all dead. I mean, they all have run their course, is what I mean by that. And at the top of this, you get this report option. And you can export any data table you want. So there's some standard reports they have.
Keep up.
Yep, that's okay.
You said you went from the ad center to the ad manager. I don't know where the ad manager, I'm trying to find the ad manager.
Perfect. Just give me a moment here. So the quickest way, I think, let me just give me a second here.
Sorry.
No, this is fine. This is part of what this is all about. So that's good. I just need a boosted post, basically. There's a couple of different ways, obviously, to get at this. And every time I go here, it's a little bit different. Yeah, this is basically a dead end. Okay, sorry. I'm just gonna see, that's why I prepped these so I don't end up with this little do loop, but here we are in the do loop anyways. So let me just go to this other spot. Sorry, I'm just gonna unshare this for a moment because that gets really annoying to watch me do all this. I'm just gonna find it specifically and stop annoying you. All right, I think I found her right here. So I'm ended up just on my account, but there must be a way to get to that from right here too. Sorry, just a moment. I don't know. I'm going to show it to you this way, because I have it here. So when you're on your own, page, you know how you have to have a personal account in order to actually have a business page and all of that stuff. So when you're on your own page, I'm just on my, when I go first into Facebook, here's what I see. You see that sidebar that's really, really big. And one of them is Ads Manager right here. So if you click on that, you end up in exactly that spot. that we were in just now. Okay, so I'm not sure why today I can't find that from the business side. I'm sure it's somewhere. But you can always get to it just on your, when you first log into Facebook, on your own page that you're managing a business page from. If you click on that sidebar with all of those new menu items that are there, you will come here. And from here, you can download all kinds of reports. You can customize stuff too. So if you're interested in particular ads, you can download those. You have a lot of variables at the top here. You can create a few rules as well to try to filter information. I would typically just, download from a period of time. There's always periods of time attached to it. We didn't have any activity during that period of time. So if you just, use lifetime, you start seeing a bunch of stuff showing up. So be aware that there's always time frame attached to a thing. You might pull your data down once a month. You might pull it down once a week, depending on how active your campaign is, but you can actually change that setting here and you can customize that. And then you see over here, it says customize the tables. You can select or deselect things that you care about, right? So there's a lot of pieces in there. The ones that I tend to focus on is what's in the spreadsheet that I show you, right? So it's really about impressions, reach, engagement. That comes with that. So these top items here, and there's a few other bits that showed up in the data set that I had downloaded before. So, but that's basically it. Does that help? I hope that helped. I'm just gonna go back to this fun spreadsheet for a moment because I wanted to show you another quick thing here about the engagement side of that. So we're back on awareness. You see how I'm calculating this? It's super simple, just a straight up division, right? And then, like I say, looking at this by per thousand is easier than to look at $0.003. That kind of, it's hard for our brains to look at it in that way. And then the only other thing I do is, I'm not sure if you've ever done this, but how do you get there in Excel? There's all kinds of little tools that allow you to simply eyeball data without doing any stats. So all I did here was highlight this. I right click on it. I go to quick analysis, and in the quick analysis, there's a few options that you have to use. And I often just use the color ones. So I'm not doing any statistics. The system is doing some fun stuff. But I can easily say, is high good or low good? Like, is a lower number better or a higher number better? I want my cost to be as low as it can be. So in this case, red is better than green. And then I can say, oh, so look at all the really red ads. That's fantastic. And now I can say, oh, how many people were actually reached? So the first column here is reach. And you see that, low dollar amounts, I'm kind of going like, oh, these are actually pretty good numbers, right? Like I've reached 2,000 people, 1,200 people. But you'll also notice that, as I was saying earlier, some of the lowest numbers will have the lowest amount of reach. Right. So there's always a bit of a triage to make sure that, you don't end up with a single dimension that says, oh, low is always better. Low is not always better if it reached hardly anybody. Right. So you do want to pay attention to both aspects a little bit. The other piece that happens, how I mentioned that I post a lot of ads, like that I might have an ad up for 3 or 4 days only. While in your scenario, you might, because it's like weekly specials or daily specials or something like this. In your case, when you're doing events, you have much longer lead times. You might be able to actually, run a thing much more frequently. Much longer is what I mean by that. I shouldn't say that, like over a larger number of days without changing the ad potentially. So when you do that, that's when you need to hog frequency a little bit. Did the same person see this 20 times by now? And that's where you need to sort of think about the story part, right? Just want to sort of close that loop a little bit. The other thing,
sorry, there is a question from Lillian in the chat about doing test ads. So when you do initial Facebook ad campaign, do you
Yeah.
run the test ads, and how long would you run it, and what dollars?
Yeah, so it's amazing what you can get for $5. It's really useful to test. So one of the things that we realized when I started working with this restaurant, by way of example, one of the things we realized really quickly looking at the stats was that the things that made a difference were photos of the chef. The brand was very much built around her. So the equivalent for you would be either you have a strong artistic director's voice that people really trust and care about, you might use that, or it's in fact the artist first person narrative stuff, right? So their YouTube videos, their dedicated social media that they might be doing for you, if they do a little message or something like that. The other thing we found is that food photography really mattered. So showing the experience, not other people having that experience, not restaurant at large shots, but specific colorful photos. You know how food's always brown, right? So making sure that, you know, the plating was particularly colorful, that made a difference. So we simply, you know, early on did a bunch of analysis and we realized those things. And then we started to post much more of that stuff, right? We have a really particular brand voice. Speaking in that voice as opposed to a marketing voice is really important. So whatever the authentic voice part was, whenever it sounded like marketing, engagement drops. When it sounded like the chef was talking to you, engagement rises, right? This is intuitive in a way, but it's not normal for a restaurant necessarily. Like a run-of-the-mill restaurant doesn't have chefs that are known. Just like part of your lineup will be, you know, really well-known artists, and part of your lineup will be some of the other folks that are there to build a full season, that it might be emerging or still developing artists, right? So be aware of that. And all you can do is try it out in your context. Not every market behaves identical to every other market. What works in Nelson, BC may or may not work in Fort St. John or St. George or the Lower Mainland. Those are not the same places. What works in the city of Victoria isn't necessarily what works out in, you know, on Salt Spring Island. You have really different audiences, really different pre-existing knowledge, right? So those are all variables that you need to get to know. And if you have a market primarily comprised of artists, I can guarantee you they care about slightly different things because they're much more informed to start with than a run-of-the-mill audience member who just wants to have a good time, right? So those are nuances you gotta play with, and the only way to figure that out is to look at this kind of stuff, right? The other piece that I want to point out is, so there's engagement, and what does engagement cost? So I never just look at the number itself. So this is the same data set. I'm just highlighting only the parts that are about engagement. So engagement, and there's a couple of engagement measures that Facebook gives you. One is a link click, as opposed to a comment or a share or things like that. So I'm only highlighting that here, not because I care about that. It's because sometimes you may have reason to care about just somebody clicking on the link that you posted with a thing. What I typically care about is all the other engagement, and it gives you this lovely summary column for all things people clicked. So, you know, for instance, when somebody clicks on a photo, they go into the photo album out of a post. When somebody clicks on the see more, that's a click on your post, but they haven't gone outside of the Facebook post. In fact, they're just reading the other 25 words that I wrote. So I'm interested in the all part of that from an analysis standpoint. The reason for that is that most of my data sets are just never big enough to want to thin slice the shares and the reshares versus the comments versus other engagements, right? If you're in the Lower Mainland, perhaps that is useful because your market is 4 or 5 million people. If I'm in Whitehorse, I can tell you that's just a futile statistical exercise because it's not big enough, right? So be mindful of that. That's part of the reason why what I'm doing here is in fact not any kind of advanced stats. It is simply describing the data that you have. It's very simple to do. There is virtually no technical skill other than, you know, being able to make a little bit of sense out of a spreadsheet. They do give you, Facebook does give you their in their reports the engagement cost per click right here, and as you can see, you know, they're like 0.09 cents. 0.05 cents. Like that's really hard to make sense out of, right? So if you simply multiply that number by 100, you can do that in your head, or you can do it really. You'll get something that says $1.10 or $1.08 or 80 or something like that. That's easier for us to understand. So you can just do that naturally for yourself. And then one of the things you can do, you see I have the awareness metric here right beside the engagement metric. So sometimes your question might be, what's the best overall ad? How do you square awareness raising and the cost per 1,000 individuals that you're reaching with engagement with that? So one of the super easy things you can do, which is what I did here, is you can basically just, sorry, I should show that to you on this tab. You can basically just add these two things together. So as I was saying, so right now what I'm doing here in this column, I'm adding both awareness and engagement, but because the 0.09 cents per click isn't really a sensible thing, what I do is I multiply that by 100. So it's now a cost per 100 clicks, and I add that together with awareness, and I come up with a new dollar amount, right? And now I can sort of have a more nuanced understanding of, you know, how together they might be behaving. And again, all I'm doing is I'm eyeballing this, right? I'm using that quick analysis piece. And if you prefer the arrows, we can do that, right? I like the colors. It goes from dark red to dark green, and in between the differences are less. And if something is white, it's basically the average or close to the average in the overall data set, right? So when I eyeball that, I can start to relate that to the particular posts, right? And I can say, oh, what's dark green? What's expensive? But is it having, you know, some other attributes that I really care about, like the reach and impressions, you know, the straight numbers, not just the percentages or not just the dollar amount. Is that making some sense? So what happens here is that what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to dramatically reduce the number of variables that we look at, right? And I'm trying to make sure that those variables relate to my marketing objectives. So if your marketing objective is solely to increase awareness, you have no need to look at engagement. All you need to look at then is how many people did you reach and what did it cost you per 1,000 people? That's it. That's the only thing you need to look at. If you were also trying to increase engagement, to have more conversations, to have more amplification of your stuff, and that was in fact your marketing goal, then you look at engagement. But don't look at engagement just because you can when your goal is about awareness, right? Because you didn't design it to deliver engagement then. So this is where it's important that you pay attention to matching up the process. How are we doing? This is both slow and fast, I realize. One of the things I'll do as part of what I'm going to be giving to you out of this workshop is I'm actually going to attach those spreadsheets for you. So you can poke around a little bit and kind of go like, oh, I get the formula, because you see there aren't a lot in here, but it might still help you to be able to poke a little bit on your own as well, as opposed to me just trying to make that intelligible for you. Are there any other questions or concerns right now that are on your mind, or anything that that might be in the chat, Cheryl? I'm not sure.
People were discussing the number of times that you have to see something in terms of the campaigns you're doing. Like, what is the optimal number of times?
Yeah. So there is, in all honesty, there is no hard and fast rule on that. You may remember the old rule from newspaper advertising that in order to, that you had to have 7 impressions before you would act on it. In order to obtain 7 impressions, you would have to run a thing, 3 times more. So you run an ad 21 times in order to get 7 impressions, only to finally get an action out of that. But this would have happened over a long period of time. Like even in a daily newspaper, that would give you a months-long ad placement, which is why you would not do that. It's too expensive. But if you're a big advertiser, that is how it worked, because you see it only every 3rd time, and you have that whittling down effect. That's that same funnel effect, right? Social media's half-life is nothing like that. So if the thing you have to say is really interesting, right? Or you're getting a lot of, sometimes you have a post and you just keep on getting hits on it. And then 3 days later, somebody else comments on it. So it shows up back into people's news feeds, right? That mechanism. When you're responding to people's comments, it's one of the reasons why you should respond to people's comments, is it ends up back at the top of people's news feeds for that bit of time, right? So if it's natural, organic, interaction like that, that's great. If that is strictly happening because you've sponsored it, you will find that, your own threshold might be lower or higher than other users, but where you'll see it is when you look at the frequency information and you start to look at, is anybody still clicking on that? And am I spending money on that frequency, right? Because if you're spending money on frequency that doesn't deliver much anymore, other than potential annoyance, then get out of it. There is a measure within what Facebook shows us on the posts, which is the stuff around followers, and you can eyeball really quickly overall what's happening with your followers in terms of I'm just going to share that page with you. So this is, again, we're just on the insights page on a business page, and I'm clicked on followers here, and you see the people who are following you versus people who have unfollowed you. What's your unfollowed number? You also on a post basis can see how many people are hiding a specific post. So if all of a sudden you see that number spike, right? Like people aren't quite prepared to unfollow you, but they're muting you for 30 days. If that spikes and you get more than 1 or 2, all of a sudden, pay attention to that. There's something that happened on that post that's kind of weird and wonky. So this is a useful thing to sort of look at when you think something strange is going on, because people will let you know if they're engaging or not, right? And I think we get that same opportunity on a per post basis, where if you click on the post, you get all of these metrics on a per post based in this view, right? Like the likes on the post or on the shares. You see how many times something has been shared. You see the photo views. You also see the negative feedback here, right? So I'm not worried about one. We got over 2,000 followers, right? And as is true for all small data sets like this, try to ignore noise. Like a one-off isn't data, isn't a statistically meaningful thing, right? But if that was saying 10, that would be completely out of whack with what's normal for us. And I kind of go like, what the hell happened? Like what's going on that's creating this wonkiness? Okay, so on a per post item, you can just eyeball that straight in here. And to get here, all I did was I'm in the page insight. Right here, you see the page insights. I clicked on that, and now I just clicking on posts, and then I clicked on a particular post, right? And you can see that right away. Did that answer that question reasonably? The negative feedback is we don't get much of that, but I can imagine scenarios where you might get a lot of it. Like, I don't know, I just turned 50. I'm getting an awful lot of weight loss stuff going on in my Facebook feed, right? Like, or like you had a birthday and all of a sudden you're getting whatever, demographically appropriate or inappropriate messages that are bombarding you. So I mute a lot of those ads. because they annoy the heck out of me. I also sometimes get a lot of retargeting. I was doing a bunch of rentals. We were looking at, faucets, really nice faucets. So now every time I go on Facebook and I get this same image of a bunch of faucets that I'd looked at, it's retargeting, right? So we know that this happens. And at some point now I kind of go like, I don't want to see that anymore, right? The users have a lot more choice than they used to on Facebook now. So we are, not as able to abuse them. By and large, in the sectors that we're working in, this is not a big issue, right? People are there because they're interested in the arts. They've opted in, they're there for a reason. So all to say, when you see wonkiness, pay particular attention. We're not, some multinational promoting, I don't know, latest gadget on something strange.
Justine was asking about whether Facebook is the main vehicle for BC presenters or Instagram.
Great question. The good news is they're integrated now, right? In fact, if you were in Europe, you'd be using WhatsApp a whole lot more as well, because they're also now owned by Facebook. I'm not sure where different users are at within this group. Anybody want to chime in on preferences or has a sense of that?
I know we did a survey a couple of years ago now as part of our conference survey about how people wanted us to communicate to them, and email was the biggest and the most preferable, of course, but Facebook was the second way that they do communicate. And I know Colleen Brines is on our board here, and she's nodding her head. So I definitely think email is still the preferable method. But if Facebook, they do have groups as well on Facebook that are private, and they do communicate there, so they have a presence there. They use it, and I think Instagram, I'm not so sure that's really popular with our demographic.
Yeah, so I think if you just look at just to expand on that a little bit, so if you just look at the straight, how many Canadians are using Facebook, how many Canadians are using Instagram, you'll discover it's about half, right? So if all things being equal, half your audiences would also be on Instagram. 50% of your Facebook audience might also be on Instagram. There's a lot of overlap between the two. They operate completely differently. Like Instagram is really, I post a single photo, I have a cut line, I use a lot of hashtags. We talked a little bit about that over the last couple of weeks. Facebook has all kinds of other functionalities attached to that are far different. And sometimes they become noise. So initially, when Instagram came out, we discovered that musicians loved it because it was better than Twitter. It didn't have all the pollution of the bots and the strange vitriol of Twitter, right? And it was great for just taking a snap and doing something backstage or album release or something like that and having some fun with that. And then they didn't have to watch it for a heck of a lot of time, while Facebook really sucked you into the rabbit hole in a different way, right? So you may have your own personal preferences that you're bringing to that. But I think by and large, Facebook is so dominant still that if you need to optimize your time towards one or the other, for most of us, that's still Facebook. If you have found that you are presenting artists who really have a big following on Instagram, though, you may modify that a little bit. And now that the two, like I say, they're completely integrated on the back end, right? Like Facebook and Instagram use the same, a lot of, you can cross post ads and all of that stuff you do because they have the same owner and they have been integrating a lot more. You may have both anyways, but depending on, that year or that tour or that artist, you might favor Instagram because that's where their audience is. And that might be a better avenue to amplify from there. So this always goes back to, what's your marketing strategy? What's the outreach you're doing? Make sure that you select the tools that are appropriate for that. And that's today's focus. And then make sure you measure what you actually aimed at using that, right? And don't think about anything else because you're too busy. But part of this is we need to unclutter, right? We need to edit out information. And I'm trying to try to get to only focus on what truly, truly, truly matters to you. Do not focus on everything. Just reduce that right down to the thin slice that matters. So I want to just show you a couple of sort of concepts around, if you have a robust online presence, you might be in a scenario where you're thinking about, especially if you have subscription programming in particular, or you're in a larger place, like tens of thousands at least, as opposed to 500 people in Wells or something like that. And you're looking at online measurement, you might be thinking about acquiring new customers, converting them, like acquisition here is like getting people interested, converting them, buying something that might be on the phone, that might be, out of your back pocket at the grocery store, it might be on a ticketing thing. And then you're trying to retain people so that they come back. And sometimes when people drop out for a while, you might end up in a reacquisition medium. What I'm trying to suggest here is that, different activities might be better suited to some of these particular, the particular moment of relationship or the life cycle that your customer is in. And web traffic can have a particular role in that, in addition to the social media piece. So all I'm trying to do here is to give you a bit of a sense of, our focus today absolutely was social media, but it is part of it's like one room in a bigger house, right? And if you think about how you're using email, is email the best way to open a sale? Is that the only thing you need to do? Probably not, right? I mean, it depends how many tickets you got to sell. A single email might be able to do that sometimes. But in many cases, you got a few hundred, couple of thousand things to sell, you're doing a festival, whatever, right? You do need a mix. And it's useful to sort of figure out, how you're using that mix. And again, I'm going to share the PowerPoint with you afterwards, so you see a bunch of this stuff anyways. And then translating your business goal into specific marketing goals, and some of that turns into what are your online goals, and they're then specific to what am I trying to achieve on the website, what am I achieving on Facebook, what am I doing out of my email, and each of those has metrics attached to it, right? And like I say, just focus on the 1, 2, maybe 3 that actually matter to figure out whether your sales funnel is as big as it needs to be to achieve your business goal, right? And when you do that really, really well, you'll be a heck of a lot happier than if you're sort of trying to look at everything. Things that I have found useful from a web traffic standpoint is the numbers of users. Are they new or returning over a period of time? So I often look at it on a month-by-month basis. Depending on how many shows you have, quarter by quarter might be quite sufficient. Or if you're really busy and you're doing 1,000 shows a year, some of my biggest clients do that, right? Then yeah, you got to look at this every week in some detail. And what ends up happening on those really big clients, we can tell by the marketing activity whether the sales are going to be okay months in advance, not the week of the show, right? This becomes part of that. On the smaller data sets, that's a heck of a lot harder because the law of small numbers defeats us around that. But all to say, for a lot of you, you'll be like in a medium scenario around that. So, and then I look at behavior a little bit. I look at behavior a little bit. I advanced this without meaning to. I might look at my acquisition channels. I just want to finish that. Referral, where are people coming from? Facebook, Twitter, what am I doing? Are they coming out of my email to complete the sale, the ticket sale, right? All that stuff. And behavior. So sometimes when people come to your homepage, you know how your homepage is also your most dominant exit page. People never went past your homepage, and they might have been there for less than 2 seconds. Your Google Analytics tells you all of that. That's not necessarily a bad thing, but you don't want to send people to your homepage if that wasn't the right page. Like if you're promoting an event, it's got to be the event page. And sometimes, quite frankly, they just need to go to the ticketing page. So they can buy. Now, sometimes that means bypassing your website, right? And then you'll have a harder time connecting it unless you actually own your own ticketing and the visibility to that. But all to say, Google Analytics offers you tens of thousands of pieces of information, literally. These 5 is all I'm interested in for most of the stuff that I do. And then when I try to evaluate how am I doing, this is just a snapshot of the dashboard that Google Analytics gives you. It gives you users, new user sessions, number of sessions per user, page views, page sessions, average session duration, and bounce rate. That's a lot. All I care about is how many users have I got? How many of them are new? Has it gone up from the last period of time that I was looking at or down? Is it commensurate with my marketing activity or not? Right? Like if I haven't been in the market, I would expect that stuff to go down. If I have been in the market and it goes down, I have a problem. Right? And then I often compare not to a year ago because it's too dynamic. And especially now you'll have trouble doing that with COVID having sort of really disrupted things. You'll have to build up a little bit again, right? You might find all I did here was look at the prior 7 weeks. So I'm looking at a 7-week period. I'm looking at the prior 7 weeks. This was at the beginning of a major revision of a marketing plan. I get these kind of numbers. That's amazing. 30% lifts. I love it. I should charge more money. By the time I take the 6-month view of that includes those 7 weeks, I'm not nearly as impressive, but I'm very sustainable. So my 30% has come down to 13% over the full 6 months, not just that 7-week period. My page views, 24%. I'm super happy with that. I don't worry about bounce rates very much, and I don't necessarily worry about numbers of pages per session. If I'm sending you to the particular page that you need to go to in order to act on it, then your average page per session should be 1. It's the ticket sell, right? So it's not like we're all into this massive amount of content. We're not CBC or the Globe and Mail, where more pages actually mean more engagement and higher usage. In our case, that often would simply mean that they got lost and I misdirected them and they had to go through the homepage to find the thing. And now I had a do loop, right? So that's why pages per session aren't particularly important to me, especially if you're using social media and email to drive people to the specific thing that they need to go to. And then the pieces that I tend to care about, in the social networking is, yes, I care about followers, even though the organic serving up my content to my followers has become quite low, but I still care that number is higher. It gives me at least an initial play. Those are people who know me. I know that I'm making a difference there. I vary a lot about organic traffic versus paid traffic. How many individuals am I reaching and how much does it cost me? And then I'm highly conversational, as are you in your work. That's what it's all about on social media. So I actually do care about comments, shares, and likes. I just don't sweat to analyze them as individual items, right? I look at the overall engagement numbers because I don't have a data set of tens of thousands individuals. I have a universe of about 6,000 to 8,000. And then sometimes when I work with clients, they can, sort of track things to checkout or to retargeting. That's more rare to find. You gotta have a fairly, decent setup to really be able to do that. But if you do, then that's useful to track because that allows you to tie your marketing, your online activities to your marketing goals, to your business outcomes. And that's what I was hoping to cover with you today.
Inga, there is one question in the chat from
Okay.
Lillian, who asked about whether you constantly check your channel results with the waves of change, that you might get something that works, but then it doesn't work anymore.
Absolutely. So when Cheryl just said that 2 years ago they did a survey and Facebook came out on top, I would say to that, well, that was nice 2 years ago, but you'd actually have to check that again. So I go to Hootsuite. Hootsuite gives us a lot of data about social media and who's using social media and how they're using it. And they do a monthly update on stuff. One of the things, if you have a 2-year-old data set and you're trying to figure out, what are the dominant social media right now, one of the things you would be missing completely is TikTok. And TikTok has risen rapidly quickly, right? So be aware that you actually want to use the most recent data you have access to. And I've just been using Hootsuite recently because it's convenient and it's Canadian, and they do a nice monthly roll up of social media. You go to their website, you can find it. We've used it, I think, in the initial presentation 3 weeks ago. We had a link to a couple of those reports that we were pulling up data from. It is super dynamic. The other thing that the other thing I want to caution you for is just because Facebook is generally popular, it doesn't always mean it's the most popular in your market. Right? You can have, little anomalies where you find that, no, as a matter of fact, Instagram is the thing. Or you'll find that, you know what, I'm actually looking at a particular demographic for a thing. And right now, even though it's a fad and I don't have the business page for it, TikTok actually seems to be giving you a lot of traction. So go where your audience is. Don't assume it's not static. 10 years ago, if you had done some work around this, you still would have seen MySpace show up as something, as a thing. Like they're still around today, except hardly anybody uses it, right? So do pay attention. The social media stuff is way more fast changing than anything else that we've dealt with in marketing before, like print ads and things like that. And I'm not particularly I don't care about any of these tools. I only care about them. I'm only on some of that because it's work. Right? So it's not about my personal preferences. That's not a good judge for why you would go somewhere, even though it is helpful to do the things that actually matter to your audience and figure out a way to do that. So if it's not you yourself, maybe there's a colleague in your organization, right? Anyways, we are at the end of our time together, of course. So I don't want to, overstay my welcome here either. I am going to be sharing those spreadsheets, and the recording is as per usual. Joanna and Cheryl will take care of that. And I'll share the spreadsheets for you to poke around at will as well, so you can sort of appreciate a little bit about how easy that actually is, and how little that might take to try to come up with some meaningful information for yourselves. All right.
Thank you,
Joanna,
Inga.
Cheryl.
This has been a great series, and working with you and Brianna has been a real joy. I hope we will continue with some other new projects coming along, new workshops.
No doubt we will.
No doubt we will.
We're
And,
doing just as a quick highlight, we're going to be doing a 3-week digital national conference in November, and BCTC is going to be one of the partners on that. So that's going to be like a much more what's next in the world at that point, and less about nitty gritty. Like this is pretty nitty gritty what we're covering today. So it'll be a little bit more vision, and what are we needing to watch out for the next 2 or 3 years. So, and I know that'll be following right after your intentions for Pacific Content in October, of course. So we're right after that.
right. Awesome. And the pitch will be launched in the fall as well, right?
Yes, it will be. That development is moving rapidly. We're doing a round of user testing right now that should be completed by the end of next week. And so development of, the various components is moving along really quite quickly. And we're looking at a few pilots this fall. So I think Manitoba is on for piloting using their showcasing event, and because they're not able to do anything in person, they're not even planning in person, so they'll be using it as for their showcasing platform. So we'll see how that goes.
Right.
Exciting times.
Well, again, thank you. And Cheryl, thanks to Cheryl for all her work in terms of pulling these workshops together. Thank you, Cheryl. And yeah, we'll see everyone
soon. All right. Well, thank you so much, and thanks so much for sticking around with this topic as well. Have a fantastic rest of your day.